The Problems of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell, a presentation by Preeti Kumar. The Problems of Philosophy, written by Bertrand Russell, is considered one of his finest works. Russell is now recognized as one of the founders of modern analytic philosophy. His book was published in 1912 and discusses the issues in philosophy. He speaks of appearances, what seems to be, and reality, what actually is. He identifies other philosophers who were correct or incorrect in his view. He lays out certain methodologies and concepts that were used for philosophical reasons. The book comprises 15 problems within philosophy, which are condensed into 9 key concepts and ideas. A main idea asked repeatedly is, how can one be sure of anything? He explores this within the book and gives possible answers to this question. Russell questions the existence of himself and the world around him. He explores truth and falsehood of knowledge and beliefs. During this process, Russell discovers the true value of philosophy and the interpretation of its meaning. Through Russell's revelation, it is discovered that the purpose of philosophy is not to find answers, but rather to find questions in everyday occurrences. Russell defines philosophy as a criticism, and is unlike the other sciences, as there is no progress in the form of answers. Bertrand Arthur William Russell, born in 1872, was a British philosopher, essayist, logician, and social critic. His most famous works are of mathematical logic and analytical philosophy, which includes the Problems of Philosophy. He was intellectually precocious, and his earliest achievements was learning Euclidean geometry and writing his earliest philosophical work in his adolescent years, which led him to abandoning Christianity. Some later influential works based upon logic include his championing of logicism, the view that math is reducible to logic, logical atomism, and logical types. Russell went to Cambridge University to study math and gained membership in a secret society run by students known as the Apostles, which had in it 2 famous philosophers. In 1896, Russell published his first political work, German Social Democracy. He was also an anti-war and anti-imperialist activist, and later went to prison for his pacifist views during World War I. He notes that the war against Hitler was a necessary lesser of 2 evils. In 1950, Russell received the Nobel Prize in Literature in recognition of his varied and significant writings in which he champions humanitarian ideals and freedom of thought. Russell died in 1970, having written over 70 books and nearly 2,000 articles, married 4 times, and having been involved in a vast amount of public controversies. Bertrand Russell's book, The Problems of Philosophy, is a world classic. Let's take a look at what makes it so. A major concept is sense data, which are things that are immediately known in sensation, such as colors, sounds, or smells. Russell uses this concept as building blocks as he attempts to prove that the world around him exists. The book contains a series of logical and philosophical questions and concepts. The first of these is appearance versus reality. Russell uses the example of a table. He notes what it looks like first, but then states that the perceptions of the table are not what it actually is. Why is this? Well, when you look at a table, you'll see that it is a certain color, texture, or shape. But are these aspects of a table really the table itself? Here's where Russell says no, because if you change positions, you perceive the table differently. This leads to revising your idea of what the table is now that you see it in a different light. But the table doesn't necessarily have qualities either. If you could see down to the atomic level, you would also view it as something completely foreign to your idea. He points out that the visual qualities such as color are not the reality of the object, but are sense data, the things that are immediately known in sensation. Russell then asks, but if this reality is not what it appears, have we any means of knowing whether there is any reality at all? And so, have we any means of finding out what it is like? This leads to him recognizing the main problems of philosophy. Russell then speaks of the existence and nature of matter. Through this example, if you see a cat sitting in one position in one room, and then you look away and the cat is not in its original position, but rather in a whole different part of the room, how did the cat get there? One may logically assume that it just walked over and changed positions, but how do you know that is the case? The reason could be that the cat knows how to fly, and that's how it went up there. Such aspects of reality and common sense are attacked by Russell. He views the world in doubt if there is not absolute certainty. Russell also explores the concept of reality versus dreams. How can one tell apart a dream from reality? Here, Russell references Descartes, the founder of modern philosophy, and his method of systematic doubt. By applying this method, the only existence that he could be quite certain about was his own. The rest, he infers, could be a dream, because dreams have a complicated world that seems to be present, but then once you awake, you realize that it was just a dream. But before that realization, you felt that everything you were experiencing was real. The next concept or idea that Russell explores is idealism, which is the doctrine that whatever exists, or at any rate whatever can be known to exist, must be in some sense mental. Bishop Berkeley brought forth the concept of an idea, which is anything which is immediately known, such as sense data. These ideas allowed him to infer that there is no reason why what cannot have any practical importance for us should not be real. Next, Russell explores knowledge of acquaintance versus description. Knowledge of acquaintance is first-hand knowledge, so anything that we have experienced. For example, I know there is water in the oceans because I've been there and seen that. Knowledge of description is second-hand knowledge, so anything we know to be true but have not experienced personally. For example, I know of a place called Beijing. I rely on the knowledge of acquaintance of others and so do not have absolute certainty that this knowledge of description is true. Russell relates knowledge of acquaintance and knowledge of description through saying all our knowledge, both knowledge of things and knowledge of truths, rests upon acquaintance as its foundation. It is therefore important to consider what kinds of things there are with which we have acquaintance. Russell then presents the problem of how a priori knowledge is possible. The question was first brought forth by Immanuel Kant. His most distinctive contribution was the invention of what he called the critical philosophy, which, assuming as a datum that there is knowledge of various kinds, inquired how knowledge comes to be possible, and then deduced from this answer of the inquiry many metaphysical results as to the nature of the world. Thus, we have a priori knowledge which is not purely analytical, because the opposite would be self-contradictory, and it has been made evident the philosophical importance of the theory of knowledge. Thus, if we try to deny anything that could be known as a priori, we would be involved in a definite contradiction. To establish the truth of all priori knowledge, the answer given by pure empiricists was that our mathematical knowledge is derived by induction from particular instances. For example, 2 and 2 always make 4. This can be known from a single instance. And so our knowledge of the general propositions of math or logic must be accounted for. The law of thought is particularly important in this scenario, as it is how we persuade ourselves of the necessary truth through thought rather than the outward appearance and observation. Russell identifies the next concept as our knowledge of general principles, and in here he incorporates 3 laws of thought in order to simplify the concept. He then goes on to identify a famous debate between the empiricists and rationalists. He identifies who was in the debate and what the debate consisted of. Russell then addresses the world of universals and our knowledge of it. He includes the person who brought this concept into philosophy, Plato, and his theory of ideas. 2 opposing views are then presented. First is monoism, which can be demonstrated in this picture. The next view is monadism, and through this he forms a general proposition. The next area of conflict viewed by Russell is truth versus falsehood. A belief is true when it corresponds to a certain associated complex, and false when it does not. Here Russell uses an example of a belief to represent this. Lastly, Russell identifies the limits and values of philosophy. This can be represented by Hegel's philosophy as it states, everything short of the whole is obviously fragmentary and obviously incapable of existing without the complement supplied by the rest of the world. Bertrand then incorporates values of philosophy of his own. Here are some opposing theories to Russell. So, what makes the problems of philosophy a world classic? To answer this, we must first ask, what makes a classic? A world classic book consists of hotly debated topics, has high standards for quality, appeal, longevity, and influence, consists of artistic expression of life, truth, and beauty, and discovers influences from other writers. So, let's recap. Russell incorporates other philosophers, sciences, mathematics, other famous debates and arguments. He uses logic, common sense, and analogies to devise a proposition and then also counter and then prove or disprove it. He doubts and questions every step of his process. His one single certainty was his own existence. There is an absurdity in his logic, yet one cannot avoid thinking even for a moment that it has some sense behind it. There is something to say about the length and simplicity of the book. A larger range of reading levels would be able to read this book. It uses everyday objects such as a table for the concept of perception in order to identify a relatable scenario. He uses rhetoric, specifically analogies, for further understanding of his stance. He draws concepts from other philosophers and scientists and uses their concepts to enrich his own. And so The Problems of Philosophy by Bertrand Russell is a world classic because it meets all these criteria.